Much delayed safeguarding guidance for schools and colleges in England has now been published. It includes helpful changes, and from the 1st of September, places of education will need to give regard to it. Our Head of Education, John Denning, is here today to walk us through what this all means for schools. John, can you just give us an overview of what this guidance is and what it means for schools?
Yes, so this is the statutory safeguarding guidance for schools and colleges in England, which they all have to, as you said, have regard to. And on Tuesday, the version of that guidance, rather belatedly, was published for schools for starting in September. It covers a wide range of things, but within it there is a change which has been a really key concern for the Christian Institute and many others for a number of years, and a really good change has been made. So we're pleased about that.
And does this guidance apply to primary or secondary or across the board?
Across the board. So it's for all schools and colleges in England.
You mentioned there have been delays, and I know it's been actually quite a convoluted process. So why don't you just walk us through chronologically how this has all come about?
Yes. So this guidance is regularly reviewed. Almost, not quite, but almost every year a new version is produced. In 2022, there was a consultation on a change to the guidance, and Stonewall contributed to that consultation and suggested some new paragraphs to go into the guidance and a bit of rephrasing. And one of the things that was put into the guidance as a result of that consultation, at Stonewall's suggestion, was a phrase that said, being LGBT is not a safeguarding risk factor. Now, we might have all sorts of questions about that. What does it mean for a child to be LGBT? But the main concern, which is shared by a lot of people, is in relation to the T of LGBT. What that's saying is a child saying they're transgender, a child saying I'm born in the wrong body, that's not a safeguarding risk. That's not a risk factor for safeguarding that schools should consider.
Or why would it be a safeguarding risk?
Well, there's all sorts of concerns there. So it's very common for a child who is in that position to have other concerns, other difficulties in their life, whether that's their circumstances or struggles with their mental health, which they need help with. And simply adopting a new name, new pronouns, new form of dress in school, dressing as if they're the opposite sex, is not going to address those other difficulties. And also that social transitions, it's called, this dressing and behaving as if you're the opposite sex, that in itself is profoundly significant psychologically. It really cements the child in that belief, and it's a false belief. And that ultimately could lead to them pursuing all sorts of things that would cause permanent harm to their bodies, like hormonal treatment, even in the future, surgery. I mean, that wouldn't happen while they're of school age, but that's where things could lead.
So by having this kind of wording in the guidance, that could prevent schools from taking safeguarding action where they think it possibly might be needed?
Yes, that's right. And I think actually what the guidance needs to be doing, and which it now does, is to tell schools, actually look out for this. There could be safeguarding risks here. You need to be alert to this. And it did, as you say, the opposite of that. It didn't only not alert them, it told them not to be concerned, not to treat this as a safeguarding issue. And as I say, this is guidance to which schools and colleges in England are required by law to have regard.
So that was 2022, that guidance was consulted on, and that was drawn up, and that was put in place, and that was 3 years ago now. So what's happened in the meantime?
Yeah, so that remained the position in the guidance for 2 years. In the meantime, a whole load of other things happened. So there's been growing concern across society, really. Lots of different groups, not just Christians, all sorts of people concerned about what's been happening in schools, children transitioning without parental consent in schools, sometimes even schools supporting social transition behind parents' backs and not telling parents what was going on. There have been concerns about the medical treatment that's been provided. The only treatment centre for children provided by the NHS was headquartered in London, the Tavistock Clinic. That was rated inadequate. That was closed. There were safeguarding concerns about what had been going on there. The NHS England commissioned the Cass Review to look at the treatment that was being provided in the NHS, to have a real evidence-based look at that. That review reported that the importance of what goes on in schools cannot be overestimated, and recommended a great deal more caution than had been going on in a lot of schools over this issue. The government, previous government now, before the general election, it finally, after years of discussion, produced some draft guidance specifically on this issue, gender questioning children guidance. That came out in draft for consultation, but the final version of it never appeared. There's also concerns about what schools teach on this issue. So there was some draft guidance, again, produced by the previous government on relationship, sex and health education. Again, the final version of that has never seen the light of day. So a lot of things have happened in between. Then, of course, we had the general election, new Minister for Education, new Secretary of State for Education, and we at the Christian Institute arranged a joint letter to her, co-signed by our supporters who've told us that they work in education. She replied to that letter saying schools can follow new Keeping Children Safe in Education guidance. In the meantime, what they had done while they had that letter was to issue new guidance, new Keeping Children Safe in Education guidance, with some helpful wording in.
But of course, some advocate groups, some other campaign groups were not happy, were they?
That's right, yes. And there's been a lot of debate, a lot of discussion, some of it quite heated about what's been going on. And what the government did in the 2024 guidance, the guidance currently in force, but which this new guidance is replacing, they had these helpful new phrases. But at the top of the page, it said, this page is under review. That's a very unusual position for final guidance. Draft guidance is under review, then you get the final guidance, it's no longer under review. But in this case, the 2024 guidance, at the top of the page that contained these phrases, it said, this remains under review. And so schools were left not knowing what to do. Stonewall phrases had gone, new phrases, new paragraphs were here, but there was apparently no requirement to follow them because it was still under review. What happened on Tuesday is we got the 2025 guidance, and in the 2025 guidance, that notice at the top saying this is under review is gone.
So what are these new phrases that you're so excited about?
Yeah, okay. They're not perfect, I'd have to say. I'm sure, there will be Christian Institute supporters who'd read it and think, oh, I don't like this. But the point is it's a big step forward from where we were. And positively, it is explicit that the Cass Review is relevant for schools. It tells schools they need to pay attention to it. The Cass Review is really about NHS treatment, but it's recognising social transition itself is significant. What goes on in schools is important. It warns schools that social transition, where a pupil lives as if they're the opposite sex, it has unknown long-term impacts. That should make schools think, are we supporting something that has an unknown long-term impact, and could we be liable for that? It points out to schools that if one of their pupils is wanting to do this, is wanting to pursue social transition, they may have all sorts of other needs, including safeguarding needs in their lives that need to be addressed. And the answer to everything is not social transition, therefore. It instructs schools to work in partnership with parents and to consider clinical advice. And it recommends that schools encourage parents to seek that clinical advice, especially for children that are below, haven't yet reached puberty. And there it makes a very strong statement that specialist advice must be provided. And that advice, if it's being provided by NHS England, will now be much better than the advice that used to be provided, again, because of the Cass Review, which makes a number of recommendations, all of which NHS England has said that they are implementing and following. So we can expect that clinical advice to be a great deal better and have a better impact than would have been the case in the past. There will be significant caution in that clinical advice about any support for social transition, especially for younger pupils. And it just tells schools to take a cautious approach. So this is a million miles away from the previous advice telling schools, this is just not a safeguarding risk at all, don't be concerned about it.
And what are some of the elements that you're less keen on?
Well, I mean, I still question what it means to say that a child could be lesbian or gay or bisexual. What does it mean for a child to have a sexual orientation? I mean, the whole language and the whole way in which it's talked about and thought about is probably not the one that I would choose. But we are where we are, I think, in terms of how these things are dealt with, and what we really need is to get these progressive improvements in the way these things are handled. And I think this guidance, though it's not perfect, is a massive step in the right direction. I think it will really do what it should be doing, which is to safeguard children while they're in school.
There are other parts of guidance, other bits of guidance out there still in the ether that you've mentioned already on gender questioning children and on relationships, sex and health education. Where are they at now?
Yes, so the government has now said that they're expecting to publish them this summer. So we've seen the drafts, helpful drafts. We don't know what the final versions will say. They may be watered down from the helpful language in the drafts. We just don't know. We don't know for certain whether the government will actually publish them this summer, because there have been so many delays with these. I think just because there is so much internal discussion probably going on within government as to what they should say, with people having very, very diametrically opposed views. But it seems positive. I think, probably again, though that guidance wouldn't be what I would write, it's probably going to be a step in the right direction, but we'll have to see.
And just to remind supporters of what was contained in those pieces of guidance, for each one, what did you think was helpful and not so helpful? I realise they're quite big bits of guidance, yes. So there's a lot to cover.
Yeah, there is, and I think we've got some previous videos on some of this. But yes, so there's two other pieces of guidance. Guidance on gender questioning children, which is really about pastoral care in a school for a child who's questioning their gender. And it's very helpful how it frames that, how it talks about this as not as the child being trans, but a child who's questioning their gender, coming to the school and making some requests of the school, wanting to be known by different names or pronouns and different dress and all this sort of thing. And it sets some pretty hard lines, actually, in terms of saying that you shouldn't have children of the opposite sex sharing a PE changing room, for example, or sharing sleeping accommodation on a school trip. That sort of thing where it draws a hard and fast line. It says no one should be compelled when it comes to the use of pronouns. And it expresses a great deal of caution even about allowing a change of pronouns or agreeing to that. It presents it as a child coming with requests, and then the school has to weigh those requests and in considering what's in the best interest of that child and of other children, and working in partnership with parents. So there's some good things there in that gender questioning children guidance. It doesn't, perhaps, you might ideally want it to draw an even sharper line that clearly recognises there are no circumstances in which a child thinking and behaving as if they were the opposite sex could ever be in their best interest, because it's not reality. And it doesn't quite go as far as that. And then there's a relationship, sex and health education guidance, statutory guidance, which isn't about how children are treated, it's about what schools teach on all of those issues and how they organise that, how they consult parents on what will be taught, how they provide for parents to withdraw their children. Again, the draft of that came out, well, it was consulted on over the period of the general election. In fact, the draft came out just before the election. That said that schools must not teach about gender identity, and if they're asked, they must teach the facts about biological sex, which is a pretty straightforward approach, which is great, and also expresses a great deal of caution over how schools, how sexually explicit schools should be with younger children. I mean, it's clear that children should be taught in a way that protects them from abuse, enables them to recognise abuse, but beyond that, it expresses a great deal of caution. Whereas I think A lot of the organisations that have been providing teaching materials to schools have been quite the opposite. Have been, being very explicit with very young children without question. So that's also, that draft was helpful. Again, we don't know what the final version will say, but it's probably still an improvement on what we've got at the moment.
What can supporters be doing and thinking about and praying about when it comes to this guidance?
Well, it would be really good to pray for the other guidance to be released and that it won't be watered down. And we can give thanks to God for what has happened, a big change from where we were a few years ago. And we certainly should be thankful for that. Obviously, for those watching this who are teachers in England, school governors, you need to be aware of what this says. And parents can read it and can check, make sure that schools are following it. If they still see schools aren't following it, well, then you can quote it and schools will, I think, feel they have to do what the guidance says.
John, thank you very much. For more great content, like, subscribe and hit the notification bell.